Welcome to season 6 of the Not Your Mama's Autism podcast, a podcast about neurodivergence told both through the eyes of our family, the Ollies, and through the lens of the greater global neurodivergent community. I'm Lola Dada Ollie. We hope you enjoy this episode we have lined up for you. So, with that in mind, let's get started.
Dr. Tade Akere, Renaissance woman, thank you so much for joining us at the Not Your Mama's Autism podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I mentioned you're a Renaissance woman. Your jobs have jobs. We have business administrator turned psychologist while still being a business administrator, running your family medical practice on top of running a psychology practice, on top of being a wife, a mother, sister, friend, all of the things, as the kids say, all of the things. Am I missing anything? Am I missing any major roles?
Well, no, just author and talk show host.
Of course. Author and talk show host. Please name the full name of your show. And this is all in her quote, spare time. Dr. Tade Talks.
It's Dr. Tade Talks, exactly. Dr. Tade Talks. And the title of my book is No, Not My Son. No, Not My Son.
Thank you. So thank you. I know there were so many roles. I know I would have missed one or two. So thank you for helping me help myself. I appreciate it.
It's overwhelming just hearing you run through that whole list. Like, who's that woman?
You live a rich life. Your jobs have jobs. You do not let anything stop you. That is for sure. That is the consistent theme I hear in all of the roles.
You're very kind. Thank you for putting it that way.
So thank you. So you are a psychologist, but before we get to your current day career and the richness of your practice and the clients you help, let's start at the origin story. What I suspect is the reason how you became this amazing psychologist today. You have beautiful son on the autism spectrum. You have actually 3 children, correct?
I have 3 sons.
3 sons. You're very busy. 3 boys.
Yinka is my middle son. He's my middle child. Yeah.
So
and he's how old is he now? He's 25.
25.
I can't even believe that. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He turned 25 in December.
Okay.
So
tell us about Yinka.
Like I said, he turned 25 in December. He's very independent, very, very independent. And I think we raised him to be that way. That those are one of the miracles, that God has done in our lives for him to be independent. And I'll tell you a quick story. So just recently, we drive him everywhere. We're trying to get him to learn to drive. So we drive him everywhere. And his brothers also will take him. So he has different programs that he does. And just a few weeks ago, I guess it was time for him to go to his program, and there was nobody in the house to drop him off. We got home and Yinka wasn't home. So about 2 hours later, we got a call from the swim instructor and said, "Who's picking Yinka up?" And we're like, "Where is he?" He says, "He's right here." That he just rode up in an Uber. So he actually called an Uber by himself. That's how far he has come. He usually, because he works 3 times a week, so he comes back home in an Uber. The people from his work, they kind of schedule the Uber for him. But I think he's kind of learned how to do it. He knows all the addresses of everywhere he has to go to in the neighborhood. And he did Uber himself twice that week. And you can imagine how I felt. I almost, I almost fainted. Like, what, this morning when I had to go somewhere very early and I told him, "Can you do Uber to work?" He said, yes. And he actually Ubered to work by himself. So that's my success story. And that's my Yinka. It's been a roller coaster journey. I don't know. When he was 5 years old, actually when he was 18 months was when we first knew something was wrong, his 18-month visit, and we started the whole early intervention. Then people were dropping hints about that word autism. And I'm like, what is this word autism? I didn't, for some reason, I didn't pay attention to it, like a lot of mothers today. I don't know if it was denial, but because I'd never heard the word, and my focus was on, I have a child that's not speaking, and he's almost 5 years old. I need him to start talking, and that was my focus until I went to the library, did my research, and I realized that, I was sitting on this volcano of of a disorder, and that's where the whole journey started for me. Started the research, started going to looking for different programs. I mean, my husband and I traveled far and wide to different programs. We went all the way to upstate New York. There was a program there, the Sunrise program. We attended that. We've done the medications. We have done exercise. There was one exercise they called the brachiator or something, and we had some guy come and build a whole equipment in our basement to have him do this exercise. So we've been through a lot of different, experiences with him. But I guess the ones that stick out most is just the different therapies, the speech therapy, physical therapy, OT for a while, music therapy. And then, then we got him into music, actually playing instruments. And this he actually chose by himself. So you can just stop me because I like to, I can go on and on. So he was, I think he was about 7 or 8 years old, and the public schools, they have a way of having children pick up instruments. So his brother had to go pick up an instrument. This wasn't Yinka. So I took the 3 of them along, and we're in the room with all these instruments, and my oldest son picked up the drums, and the other child picked up, I forgot what he picked up, maybe like a tuba or something. But Yinka just went for this trombone. It was a very odd instrument, and he picked it up, and we were like, okay, Yinka, we have to go. Can you drop this instrument? Because Deji got what he wanted, and we have to go. And he refused to put it down. He didn't put it down. He ran around the room with carrying this, whatever it was. And I asked him, like, what is that? They said, it's a trombone. I'm like, it looks like a trumpet, or I thought it was a saxophone or something, but then I was told it was a trombone. And that's how his journey started with the trombone. And he never picked it up. And the teacher came to me and said, if he wants it, he can have it. He lives in the district, so he can, rent it. And so I had to, of course, pay for his instrument as well. Then I had to find him a music teacher. But so it's been how do I say it, like just a cascade of blessings. People just coming up to us and offering their help. And just like we found this music teacher, we went to a place where they were all doing music, learning piano, and he wanted to learn as well. And I never hold him back from doing anything, because he has 2 other brothers who I make sure that they have a rich and full life. So we got to the music place, and he wanted to play the piano. And the man that owns the place says, I know somebody that can teach a child with special needs. Do you want me to call her? So they called her, and she got in touch with me, and she said, yeah, I can take him once a week, bring him in as well, and I'll teach all of them together. And this is how Yinka started, piano, learning the piano from when he was very young. And then she also could play the trombone. What a blessing. We didn't even know that. And she started teaching him the trombone for many years. And I'm talking over 10 years. She was teaching all the kids, but then the only child that stuck with his music was Yinka. So now he plays the piano, he plays the trombone, he can read music. He currently plays in a community band, and he actually plays in our church band as well. So he's one of the musicians at my church.
So when you first got the diagnosis, how did his autism manifest itself at the time? Was he minimally verbal in comparison to developmentally to his brothers or his peers? How did it show itself?
So initially, before he turned 18 months, he would say 1 or 2 words here and there. When we went to church, he would say things like glory, hallelujah, like, little kids do. But then he would not respond to his name. He would not he didn't smile a lot. He would not look at you, wouldn't make eye contact. As a child, he was very quiet. Even when I did the ultrasound, when I was pregnant with him, he was very, very docile. He wasn't moving. Unlike my first son was moving so much, he was just calm. And he came out like that, just calm, and he wasn't talking. He was nonverbal until he turned. So I think I don't know at what point when he lost the speech, because he never really had a lot of speech. He just would say words here and there. And at 18 months, when they were asking how many words does he have, we said 2. And of course, by then he should have had at least 50 words or something. So that was when the pediatrician referred us to the early intervention. And then it really dawned on us, at least on me, because my husband is a physician. So I think he had an idea and he kept trying to tell me. He would say, can you guys talk more to him? But I didn't understand what that meant. Like when you say talk to him, I mean, we talk to him, we all talk in the house. But then fast forward, coming to realize that he didn't really have language, he was not responding. And then he would take off by himself. He always wanted to be by himself. He didn't feel comfortable around other children. He would play around them, but he would play maybe parallel to them. He would not play with them. So if kids were if we went to a birthday party once and all the kids were downstairs jumping around, cutting cake, and he climbed up the stairs of that house and sat at the top of the stairs, sat there by himself, and he was playing with whatever toy he had found. And I would go and look for him and say, Yinka, come on, and every time he would just go back. And I noticed that whenever we went to anybody's house, or he would just find a quiet place by himself. So that's how, it manifested in him. He didn't say his first words until he was almost 6 years old. So that's how it manifested for us, like just being nonverbal, grabbing you, and he was very, and I think with children that have autism, that's how they get very independent, because they tend to want to do things by themselves. If they didn't have the language, then they would grab you and pull you to what they wanted. And if you were not responding, he would go try to climb or try to get whatever it was that he wanted. He learned very early how to go into the refrigerator and get whatever he wanted to, make a sandwich and things like that. So, and I think that's where part of my training for him also came on. When I started reading about it, I realized that you can't just let them be that independent, because then they would feel there's no need for language. Yep. So you have to make them ask for things. We try to put a lock on our refrigerator, but at some point I just started putting pictures of all the foods, anything he wanted. I'll put it on the refrigerator, and whenever he wanted something, if I was there, I would just stop him and say, what do you want? Give me the picture and tell me what is this? What do you want? And, just the constant training. I did have help from some social workers that would come to the house and teach me how to do the PECS. The PECS system helped us a lot. So we did that. We had a speech therapist for many, many, many years as well, who also, helped us with a lot of computer.
And PECS, for those that don't know, is picture exchange communications.
Right. So it's been a long time. So that's how it manifested, and that's how the journey started for me.
You are Nigerian, and I am Nigerian as well. I wanted to ask you if you experienced any stigma from members of your community during this time. Not as much now, because obviously Yinka would be considered an early intervention success story. But within certain cultures, and I joke and say Nigerians are type A personalities. It's kind of it's almost in our DNA. I joke, like, for instance, at the start of your podcast, you have 17 jobs. I have at least 13 jobs. It's just what just kind of what we do.
We do it all.
We do it all. And our goal is to do, speaking in generalities, don't email me, speaking in generalities. Nigerians sometimes are known as being very accomplishment driven, very
overachievers.
Yes,
I think that's
overachievers. And now when you place that as our foundation, and then something like neurodivergence enters your house, which is the very definition of being different from whatever normal is, right? You have a child with a differently wired brain. Did you experience any stigma from members of the community as a result of those early days, early months, early years of the diagnosis?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, first of all, I didn't understand what I was going through. So when I think back, I believe that a lot of the people around me as well didn't know what it was. And we don't leave that room in our community for failure. We don't leave room for being different. You know, just thinking the way we all grew up in Nigeria, you know, when you had a child that was not behaving properly, you had to either discipline the child or, you know, however you do it, you make sure that child complies, you know. But then here we are halfway across the world, and it's a whole different story. And I'm not saying that I didn't discipline my kids. I did discipline them, but then I learned very quickly that this one child was different, and discipline was not going to, the kind of discipline would have to be different. Discipline would have to be a different, you know, look different for him. So yes, there was that stigma of friends, family that would make comments about, oh, this is not normal. This is a demon. Somebody once asked if children with special needs have the spirit of God in them. Somebody asked that question. Wow. Were around me, and I knew that they were, you know, trying to make comments about why is her child always roaming around and he wouldn't sit still, and all the attention is always on him, and she's not a good mother, she's not raising him right, forgetting that I had one before him and I had one after him who behaved perfectly. So you would think that people would think of it that way and not focus on, you know, judge me by this one child. And I believe I was judged a lot by this one child. People made a lot of comments, you know, about you must have done something. You must have, you know, so that's also the stigma comes from there, that for you to have a child with special needs, you must have done something, forgetting that, and even people that knew that this runs in families. Yeah. You know, this runs in families, you know, not wanting to put anyone on the spot, but some family members knew that there were other members of the family that had some disorders that were similar to what my son had, and nobody told me. It was like, this is your fault. This is what you did. It's your character. You're not a good person. God is punishing you. And it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a lonely place. And then when I found out that this was, you know, just reading about it, and then realized that there were other family members that had the same disorder, maybe not as pronounced, but had felt a sense of betrayal. You know, I'm like, I'm here suffering, going through this, and somebody visited us from the UK, and she stayed at our house, and she says, you know, this thing runs in our family. You know, so and so. You've never met them, but they also have this. They just what your child is doing. And I was like, okay.
But why? And this is something we've mentioned earlier in the podcast, that people with autism spectrum, this condition, in our culture, they tend to be isolated. So you don't meet them, you don't see them. It's almost like sometimes in families, they'll put them in the village. So you don't get to interact with them. I remember when Tosan met my brother the first time, one of the first things he talked to me about was, how come I've never met someone on the spectrum? He goes, just numbers wise, in Nigeria, it would be impossible. And growing up, I can't remember one person who I saw stimming or anything like that. And we think our theory, and I think at least anecdotally, you can confirm, is we isolate them and we remove them from public spaces. And it's wrong.
That's exactly what we do. And that's exactly what happened, why I wasn't allowed to meet certain people, and it's the denial, the isolation, the stigma that comes with it. When you think back, I'm not even going to blame anybody, but then there was that stigma. Also, in our culture, if you have someone with a disability or a disorder in the family, and you were going to marry into that family, they wouldn't allow you to marry into a family where there was someone with special needs. That's I guess it's a Nigerian thing. More so, it's very common amongst us Yorubas. So that's, when you think of it, that's usually, that was, I guess, part of the reason why people would isolate people like that within the family. They would, like you said, take them to the villages. A lot of wealthy people would take their children abroad and have them in, facilities where you would never even know that that person existed. And they would never talk about the person. I mean, so that's, I think it's one of the very hidden secrets. Like, you just don't take them out in public. I mean, just the way we do here is so different. Even now, when you go back home, even people in the US, I know a lot of Nigerians in the US that I have interacted with them so many times, and even knowing me and knowing my experience, they never told me they had children that were on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, there's some people, I've never met their children. I know them, I see them in public spaces, but you never meet their children. So it's still that stigma, that isolation, I guess denial as well. I don't know if denial fits in that,
I think it can. I definitely think it can. And denial is actually one of the topics I want to talk to you about, because I think it dovetails quite nicely from stigma, because I think that could be a reason for some people going into denial. And I'm not a psychologist, like you're the professional on the line, but from what I've seen, just life experience, denial is the enemy of progress in this situation. It's the enemy of progress. And knowing I grew up with a brother who was autistic and watching my parents go through the many stages of grief, denial, all of those things, I decided early on to let these kids know that their brains are wired differently and there's nothing wrong with that. Society may occasionally call them weird, but this is how their brains were made. And I see some parents struggling because a lot of people, before they have kids, they have ideas of how their children are supposed to look and act and the jobs they're going to have. And they've created this whole life before the life has even been formed.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to reconcile your expectation with whatever the reality ended up being, especially if the reality and the expectation are so different. But I believe that prolonged denial, and this might be a strong word, but a prolonged denial is the same as a slow moving poison throughout your family.
Yeah, it's very dangerous.
It's very dangerous. Yes.
Very, very dangerous. And I tell people about it, and that is why I don't hold back in approaching mothers when I notice something about the child. Some people would, they don't want me talking to them, because when I'm talking to them, they know there's something wrong. They know there's something wrong. But then I want you, my thing is, I don't want you to go through the trauma that I went through. You don't have to go through this. If you are able to, get this child the help that they need. As far as, why wait till the child goes to kindergarten? Why wait until the child is in 3rd grade and the school starts calling you? Why can't we deal with it right now that the child is 2-3 years old, and we can get him some therapy, we can get him some help? But some people just do not want to, they don't want to hear it. And I think it's part of our culture also, that sense of resilience that we have. We believe that we can overcome anything, which to a large extent we do, but then there's, like you said, there are people amongst us that if you remember when we were in school, not everybody was able to catch up with schoolwork. Not everybody was able to do the, and they would spank you and, have all these lesson teachers and, they would just, it's almost like you fake it till you make it. They will make sure you get there. But then when you really look at these people, they still grow up to be adults that are still emotionally, underdeveloped emotionally. So they can grow up, they can do all the things that everybody else is doing, but you will still see that that there are still some discrepancies in those people's behavior, in their emotions, how they handle their emotions. I mean, it's something that I kind of have studied in our culture, as far as just even the way the whole country is and how we are as a people. There's a lot of denial, because a lot of issues were never addressed properly. So I don't even know how I got into that.
But it's the through line is, we're not just one thing. We're many, many, many layers upon which, if your family happens to have an autistic family member, that's just one trait. But it's all interwoven, is what I hear you saying, is that it's not just autism, it's the background, it's the environment upon which a child grows up in, it's the openness of the parents and their support networks, because that now dovetails nicely into the mental health of caregivers. Because over time, you may have a child who may at first need high supports, and then over time, he may end up, being able to, he or she, go to college and live independently, have their own job and be fine. The thing about this life is that you just don't always know what's around the corner.
Yeah.
And that can create some serious emotional roller coasters for parents, for grandparents, for other loved ones, for the child themselves. Because if it's anything, now that I'm armed with more knowledge, because when my brother was coming up, ignorance was not bliss. We just didn't know what we didn't know. And now that I see my kids and I compare them sometimes to their uncle, so much of he really went through, especially when he was younger, a lot of issues with self-regulation. Now that I realize that he had sensory challenges that we didn't know how to help him cope with. He got to a point where he could no longer get on a plane because he didn't have the therapy needed. His world got smaller and smaller. And it made me realize not only what he was going through, but how it affected the whole family, how it affected mental health. And this dovetails nicely into what you do professionally as well. It's just the mental health of caregivers. Let's talk about that, the importance of that. So what is your take on improving and sustaining quality mental health if you happen to be a lifetime caregiver?
So let me talk about my experience. When I got the diagnosis, of course, I had a lot of prayer, just wishing and praying and hoping, just praying for a miracle, and I really believe that, God would do the miracle and we would get that healing that we wanted. And I wanted it to be instant. I wanted it to be, like that. And at some point when I realized that, and I talked to, a few people, spiritual leaders, and they said to me, this healing is going to come, but it's going to be gradual. And I couldn't deal with that. I didn't know how to deal with it. And I think for many years, I was in depression myself. I was depressed. I was anxious. Now that I'm a therapist and I'm a psychologist and understanding the symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, having a panic attack, I have gone through all of that, so those are things that as a caregiver that you go through, because you mourn basically the loss of what would have been, especially what you were saying about our community. We have these ideals for our children. My son is going to be this, is going to be that. And then all of a sudden you realize that may not happen. So just mourning that loss and the panic of how is he going to survive in this wicked world, with such a disability, that kind of threw me into a panic, depression. I was angry. I was very, very upset. But at some point I had to channel that. I never really sought help as far as therapy, and I should have at that time. Now I know better, because by the time I went to school, we had to go to therapy. If you're going to be a therapist, then you have to have a therapist, So I would encourage mothers and fathers out there, if you begin to feel those symptoms, of depression, of anxiety, anger, irritability, it's all normal. It comes with the territory. Please seek help. Please seek help. A lot of our parents, a lot of us as caregivers, we're very susceptible to high blood pressure, to anxiety, God forbid, heart attacks, because this can be very stressful. Just taking care of children is stressful on its own. Then taking care of a child with special needs is very stressful. So make sure you are seeing your physician as often as you can. Make sure you're doing your well checks. Make sure you have a therapist. Having a therapist is the same thing as having a physician. So if you have somebody that's taking care of your physical body, have somebody that's taking care of your mental health. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It just helps you to cope. They teach you coping skills. The support that you're not going to get from your community, you will get it from professionals. So it's very important that you seek help, as far as seeing a therapist, joining a support group. If you're in a neighborhood where there's more than one, parent, start your own support group. I did that at some point in my life because I just needed to have like my own tribe of people around me, finding out that there were other mothers like me who also felt isolated. So we kind of came together and we started to pray. We would just sit down and we would talk, and that was very, very helpful. So there's always a tribe out there that you can, link up to, that can help you. So you don't have to go this alone or isolate yourself. And it's nothing to be ashamed about.
But tying back to the denial, if you're in denial, you can't tap in to all that potential support that's out there. Because
exactly.
Sometimes you get lulled into this lie that you're alone in all of this. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a positive thing about social media, because my mom didn't have that benefit, because she thought she was by herself. Mm-hmm. But seeing sometimes, and this is a positive thing about social media for once, is I love going through my feed and seeing self-advocates of various ages. Yes. Who can really explain to the rest of us how they're feeling.
Yeah.
And also being able to see moms talk about their kids, see dads talk about their kids in a most loving way. It's a reminder that we are very much not alone. And it also helps with mental health. I thank you for bringing up therapy. I'm a big, big, big advocate for therapy. I too seek out therapy and family therapy as well. We have a family therapist that's really important to make sure that marriages stay strong. You know, when you have a child who may never leave the nest, it's something to, you have to build this marathon mindset in a way that your parent peers don't have to. Okay. So we've talked about denial, we've talked about mental health of caregivers, we've talked about cultural stigma, talked about Yinka's autism diagnosis. Some of the methods you've employed with him that have been successful. Let's talk about how you became a psychologist.
Oh boy. So
it's not every day that you go from mommy advocate to PhD in psychology. Let's talk about that.
I like you said, the typical Nigerian is an overachiever, right? But some of us also we're control freaks, I would say. Mm-hmm. My husband makes that joke that I like to be in control of everything. And I think I do because I want to know what's happening to me, and I want to be able to, at least have some kind of control. So when I had here I am with this child, and reading and hearing all these things that people are doing and that can be done. And I still felt very inadequate. So I felt like, okay, so I have this child who's going through this. There must be other mothers, families out there in my community who are also have been isolated, who have also been isolated and are feeling like, how am I going to deal with this child? So I said, well, maybe I should, and the main thing then was, my main concern with him was speech. He wasn't talking. So I said, let me go for speech therapy. Maybe I'll be a speech therapist and I'll be able to teach my child how to talk. That was the goal then. I would teach my child how to talk. And then I'm like, yeah, but then, speech therapy it's kind of like, for some reason, they were not really accepting a lot of people into the programs. I don't know why, I guess therapy by itself is more of a Western thing. It's not really something that a lot of, people in the diaspora or, how do I say, maybe, I guess now a lot of people from other cultures are going to school for it. But even when I went to school, my school, we only had, I think I was there was 2 of us that were Black in the whole school. And when they came to do the audits at the time, the reaccreditation, they told them that they were not diverse enough and that they were not going to renew their accreditation. So they, got more Black people, Hispanic teachers, and it was like, all of a sudden there's a whole mix of, brown and Black people coming into the profession. So I looked at that and I realized that there's not a lot of, my son had a speech therapist, and we were so blessed. For some reason, he was a Black man, okay, for many years. And it was a rarity. When I found him, we just talked to him like, oh my God, this is gold, because he got my son, he understood. We had gone through at least 5 different therapies, therapy, what do you call them, like places, and they just couldn't help him until we found this man. So he started encouraging me. He said, you should, go do speech therapy or something. So when I started to apply to Northwestern, and I was like, okay, I want to do this, because I really wanted to go back to school at the time anyway. I'm like, what can I do? Let me do this. I think this would be nice. And then on the way, I was filling out the application, and then I was looking at the different courses they had, and I saw clinical psychology, and then I went and I read about it. And then I realized that it was much broader than just speech therapy. And then I realized that I want to help people, and I can help more people if I do, clinical, because clinical is much broader. And, that's where the whole thing got born anyway, with my son's speech therapist and wanting to be a speech therapist. And then I ended up, reading about psychology and realizing that this is definitely what I want to do. But then initially, my initial goal was, I just wanted to help my son. I just wanted to help my son so he could talk and be more, social. But then it became something much bigger than me, because I realized that, how do I help people in my community who are suffering in silence? It's how do I say it? It just was such a burden, especially for people back home in Nigeria, where there's it's just beginning to become a thing, having a therapist in Nigeria. Like, I will say within the last maybe 10 years, when my son was born, I can't even imagine having, if he was raised in Nigeria, where he would be right now and how, things would be. So I really wanted to be able to give back to the community and to help, other women like me who coming into the US at a very young age of, I was like 25 when I came in here. I was very naive. And then all of a sudden you have this child and they're talking about, or I'd never heard the word autism. Like, it never just even crossed my path. And I think autism just became really popular within the last maybe many years. So, yeah. So even back then when he was born, it was still, it's pervasive developmental disorder. And we always tiptoe around that autism word, and people, but then people have been going through it, like your mom went through it. I have an auntie also that her son he just turned 40, and they grew up here in Chicago. And you can imagine the isolation. I don't know how old your brother is, but then these
Yeah,
are
he's close. He's
this was
37.
that generation. They were here by themselves, and they had no help at all.
Yeah, no help at all. And then you had some of that same stigma that it's something they did wrong. Because I remember I remember growing up and my mom saying, I didn't use drugs, I didn't smoke, I don't understand what happened. And because we didn't know, like it's not like now where there's so much information to glean from. But then it was very much, okay, your child is different. What did the mom do wrong? What happened here? And
even back in the day in the US, they would say when children had autism, there was that research that said that it was because the mother was very cold, or there was that term they would use, and that it was women that were cold that would have children that had autism. But that's not true. I think for the women that we know, you and I, we know each. I've never known you as a cold person. I don't think I'm a cold person, and a lot of the mothers I've met, I'm the most very warm and friendly and outgoing.
Yeah. And, my mom's not cold. She's very spicy.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that was just a myth, and just people trying to figure out what it was, because a lot of people didn't really understand what it was. So everybody was just it was more like a trial by error. We're all kind of, waving the broom in the dark, hoping that we'll hit something and something would stick. And that, at some point it was like, oh, it must have been the vaccine, or, it's something in the, I don't know, the food or whatever it is. There's just been, but there's still really, nobody knows what the cause is.
I'm glad we're, at least research-wise, we're starting to move away from why and more of how can we best help those on the spectrum with certain sensory challenges, with anxiety, comorbidities. How do we help them improve their quality of life? Because I strongly believe if we throw more research into those areas, we can help a decent population of people increase their quality of life. And that's very important.
Very important. Management is just going into the management of it, and making sure that the children have, like you said, a good quality of life, and they're able to, just like I was talking about Yinka, how just raising him to be independent, you have to give them those tools. And it's not in denying and ignoring, because if you deny and ignore now, the child will still be there 10 years from now, and just a bigger problem for you if you don't take care of it now. So
and obviously, that old saying, when you've met one person on the spectrum, you've literally met one person on the spectrum, and it manifests in different ways. And I know you're talking about more of children who need high supports that now grow up to become adults with high support, and with very little therapy along the way. And we're both just trying to say the same thing in that angle of making sure that people realize the importance of therapy along the way, interventions that can just help your child, adolescent, and eventually adults self-soothe and just regulate their bodies in a way that increases their quality of life. So very important, very, very important. So given your professional expertise, given your rich personal experience, what advice would you give parents at two different ends of the life cycle, right? I'm thinking those fresh days, months, years of the diagnosis. And then the second part of the question would be older kids transitioning into adulthood, because that's where you are now. So what advice would you give families at these two periods in life?
So for younger families who are just getting their diagnosis, for people who have younger children, just like we've been saying, early intervention, go out there, do your research, whatever programs they have out there. We tried everything, I mean, thank God we had the resources, but I believe that where there's a will, there is a way, right? So there's resources out there that can help your child join programs that would benefit him. Don't hold him back. Don't keep him or her at home. Just take them out and look for programs in your neighborhood. Look for programs online. And like I said, do your research. Very important. Early intervention for me is the key. Early intervention. The more you do when the child is young, when he grows up, then he or she, you would not have to, do as much as when they were younger, just so to speak. But then the challenges are different. As they get older, the challenges are different. So, middle school is different from high school. And then when they transition out of high school, they have that 4-year transition program where they now, then they become adults. And then what do you do with them? So that was one of the shocks that we got when he turned, after 18, graduated from high school, they kept them in the transition school for 4 years. They had the choice of going to college or doing other things. But then once the day they turn 22, that's it. They're done with the school system. So what do you do? Then we start to scramble for either he gets a job or goes off to some kind of college, which, now they're beginning to have colleges for special needs. If you can afford that, they have colleges, they have vocational programs, they have the state of Illinois, at least where we are, the state has the different programs for, like, they have day programs, they have job programs where they can. So just really looking at the resources that they have within your state for children in that age group. And the states have programs, that are beneficial, because we have to start thinking of that time when we will not be here. So what happens? It's something that you have to start thinking of. So do you want him to be in a residential home? Do you want him to live by himself? Or, do you want her to, get a job? So you have to start, and then you have to start planning while they're in, middle school to high school. There's something they call the PONS list here in Illinois. I don't know if they have it in other states, but it's called Priority of Urgency of Needs. So they will kind of give them funding, children that are, that have special needs generally, they give them funding for either to go back to school, to learn a trade, to learn a vocation, to, they train them. The Department of Rehabilitation, the DOORS, they call them, they help them to get jobs. And just, there's different programs out there that adult children can, take advantage of. So those are things that I think, especially in our community, that people have to be more open to. A lot of us are like, oh, I don't want anything from the government. I don't want to depend on the state. But it's not about depending on the state. These programs were created because of people with special needs. So you have people out there taking advantage of it that don't even need it, just so they can get a check. But then we have real people who have real disabilities who are going to need these supports as they get older to be able to be functioning in society, especially when there's no family around. So I don't know what's going to happen if my other sons are married and they have their homes. Are they going to want, is their spouse going to want their brother to live with them? I'm not going to wait and, when my husband and I are gone, and then God forbid, a lot of people that are out there homeless are people that, some of them are people that there was really no plan for them. So we need to have these plans in place, and it's tough, but we have to think about it. So yes, they are, for a lot of us, we keep them at home with us for as long as we can, but we need to think of when you have a 50-year-old man with autism, what happens to that 50-year-old man or a 45-year-old woman out there, in the world by themselves, and there's no family around. That's my advice. Let's be proactive. Let's not close our minds. We're praying and we believe that God will work a miracle. And the good thing about, I think, individuals on the autism spectrum is as they get older, they do get better as far as being able to manage themselves. But that's going to be based on the training and the support that they've been giving from, a very early stage. So, I mean, there are some people, I guess, on the spectrum that may not, be able to help themselves or handle. They may not be able to be independent. But if you have an individual that's independent, take advantage of that and make sure you teach them as many skills as you can. And, don't just, I've had, because I do testing for individuals with disabilities that are, going through that same program. I once in a while, you'll find maybe a 50-something-year-old who's just getting into the program because now mom and dad are 80-something years old and all the siblings are gone away from home. And then what's going to happen? So it's nice if they're still staying with us, but at some point we will not be here forever. That's the reality of life. So I just want people to think about that.
It's very important because I think society as a whole, we focus so much on children. And we start to forget that children turn into teenagers, turn into adults. And we start to forget around the ages that my kids are now, quite frankly. I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. And we start to not see the fact that they grow up like everybody else, like every other human being. And financial planning is huge, and just making sure you set your children up, all of your children, because or else you have situations where the other sibling is now also going to be a lifetime caregiver and may not have the full financial means they could have had the parents planned earlier. So it's extremely important. And yes, it's morbid, but it's really, really important.
But that's life. It's gonna happen at some point.
It is life. It's very true. It's not an if, it's a when. Because
Father time
is undefeated. None of us have beat Father Time.
We're not gonna be here forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how can people reach you who want to get to know you a little better?
My website, drtadetalks.com. You can actually send me a message through that medium, drtadetalks.com. And I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Dr. Tade Talks. So you can always send me a message if you have any questions at drtadetalks.com. Okay. Dr. Tade Talks, yeah.
Thank you so much for this amazing conversation.
Thank you for having me.
As always, thank you for listening. If you like our content, please share and subscribe. If you're curious about how this podcast first came to be, check out season 1 of this podcast in its entirety on any major podcast platform. If you would like to follow us on social media, please check us out at Not Your Mama's Autism. As always, thank you for your support. Take care and be well.
Not Your Mama's Autism podcast is written and produced by my mom, Lila Dada Ollie, and is occasionally produced by me, Fella Ollie. My dad and sister also contribute sometimes. Big thanks to Annalie Ackerman for her audio and video editing support. Until next time, everyone, see you soon.